Hello ladies and gentlemen, Spirit of the Law here. This video is going to be all about the custom scenarios for Age of Empires 2, in case you ever find you're looking for a little change of pace. In this video, I'm just focusing on scenarios that you can play on HD from the Steam Workshop, since that's what I use, but if you are on Voobly or Game Ranger, you should still be able to find all of these scenarios and more, but I think you'll have to look for them on Age of Kings Heaven under scenarios. Now I'm open to doing a separate video for some of these maps later, where I go into more depth and talk about the proper settings, strategy tips, and show some more gameplay, and this video is just about showing the basics. I also want to point out before we start that I personally didn't make any of these, and I think it's an incredible service for the community that all of these scenario creators have put in their time and effort to making them, and part of my hope in this video is to give some of the scenarios more exposure and to get more people appreciating them. We'll start off the list with number 10, Soldier Store. Now you don't find this one around much on HD, it was kind of popular back on the Zone, and it's hard to track down a current version. But if you search and subscribe on the Steam Workshop to the HTG map packs by Hot to Go, you'll find it on the list, along with a lot of other maps that I'm going to be talking about. Now Soldier Store has some resemblance to CBA if you're familiar with that, in that you have a flow of replacement units come out and the goal is to protect a castle or tower while getting kills and fighting over the center and destroying other opponents' castles and towers. But Soldier Store has the twist that you have a choice over which units come out by putting a unit onto a designated area. And as time passes or you get more kills, you can purchase from a Soldier Store new units that you can put there. After a while you get a pretty nice selection, and you have to think about your army composition and react to what your opponents are doing. The biggest thing holding it back on this list is how hard it is to find different versions of it, and it's not super popular. But hopefully if more people start to play it, more versions will pop up on the workshop, and it'll be easier to get people to join. Number 9 for the Song of Ice and Fire fans is the Westeros, War of the Five Kings, and Game of Thrones maps. The most popular one I found on HD is by Sor Lacasto, which does need the Forgotten Empires expansion, and is basically a random map without triggers that's in the shape of Westeros, but otherwise plays like a normal random map. If you want a more structured and trigger-heavy version, there's one called War of the Five Kings and another called Game of Thrones Light Edition, where you're limited to just 20 villagers and need to keep your king alive. They're mostly meant to be played as diplomacy maps, and the main selling feature is the role-playing aspect of what's obviously a pop culture phenomenon. And if you're a fan of the Game of Thrones TV show or the books they're based on, you know that playing the map in that diplomatic cutthroat style with lots of deviousness is very appropriate and probably even encouraged. There's no deviousness in the next scenario though. Number 8 is the Afterlast RPG, which again is in the HTG map pack. This is a classic team RPG style scenario that begins with a decision to either get an archer or infantry character, and then as you get kills, your unit levels up. Obviously you have to be very careful with your unit, especially for the first few minutes while you're extremely weak, and it took us 3 or 4 tries before no one died right at the start. After that, the goal is simply to work together and kill the increasingly strong enemy units and bosses in all 4 main areas, one at a time. The great thing about the map is the teamwork that's required, and the panic of having someone on your team one hit away from death while you all try frantically to save them. The downside of the scenario is really just the amount of time that action isn't happening in, between walking back to get healed, running into dead ends, and the fact that every time someone dies, you have to decide if you're all going to reset the map or not. If you aren't a patient person who enjoys role-playing games, this isn't the map for you, but if that's in your wheelhouse, then you'll have a lot of fun with this one. Now this is the only RPG on the list, and I probably would have gone with Warriors Odyssey II over this one, which is another classic from way back in the Zone days, and it's just on another level with cutscenes and a really developed story, and you can find that on the map pack and play it on HD as well, but I found it's a little bit too buggy to recommend. Next up we have World Risk. This is another map with a lot of variations I've come across, but it's pretty hard now to track down a version. In all versions of Risk, the goal is to try to take control of wonders and towers by having your unit discover it first, so a lot of the outcome of the game comes down to how good you were at exploring the map early on. After taking a wonder, it continuously creates new units for you, which you can then send to your borders and choke points. Once you have a decent army, you can take control of someone else's wonder by destroying all of their units around it, which then makes it produce units for you instead, so you can slowly conquer the map in that way. It's quite similar to the board game Risk in the sense that you continually get reinforcements based on how much land you have, and a lot of the strategy comes down to defending choke points. It's also similar in that once you start to win, you get more reinforcements than everyone else, so you tend to steamroll the victory once you get the upper hand. On the flip side to that, I don't think it totally captures the literal risk and random dice element of the board game though, in the sense that luck doesn't have a lot of impact on the game, and it's almost entirely strategy based and comes down to who has the better micro and who can jump around sending units to the front the fastest. If you want a more luck based game, then you'll probably want to check out number 6, which is Roll the Dice. This one's also available on the HTG map pack, of course, or there's a few other versions out there on the workshop. The main idea is you spawn a new random unit every time you die, and you use them to try to defend your outposts from other players while destroying theirs. You never quite know which unit you're gonna get though, and sometimes you'll get skirmishers and rams while the other players get heroes, or vice versa, which means you'll have to make a lot of adjustments to your strategy on the fly and decide who you want to target and who you'll be trying to avoid. Another strategy aspect comes from a store system of trade carts that gives you more health for your outposts, among other things. Some people also make temporary alliances and work together to take down someone who's getting a bit too strong, and if someone has a good unit and picks up some relics, they can get some pretty insane stats, which makes them a target for everyone else. It's pretty addicting, so in general it's pretty easy to find people to join it, but I don't think it's top 5 material because it's just not a classic like number 5, which is Tower Defense. Again, there's lots of versions out there of this one, and you can find it in the HTG map pack. Ancient Tower Defense is probably the best known, though there's lots of other variations with little balance tweaks, and there's even a cooperative variation. The basic premise in all of them is that increasingly strong AI units come through in waves, and your job is to try to stop them from reaching the end of their route by building towers. The winner in the classic versions is whoever dies last by holding off the AI the longest. It's a lot more complex than it sounds though, and there's always a very in-depth store mechanic that has interesting trade-offs, like do you buy the one attack every 5 seconds that slowly improves all of your towers, or the upfront plus 100 attack? Or do you hold off for a few more minutes and buy the plus 200 attack, which comes at a slightly better deal? And you also have to think about maybe holding off until you have more towers, since the upgrade only affects ones that are already built. Or hang on, maybe you should get a few more trade cards, because that'll get you more kings in the long run, which means more upgrades later in the game. It's a balance act of trying to figure out the perfect time to get certain upgrades to get the most out of them, while also making sure you don't die in the meantime while thinking too far ahead. The only downside to the map for me is how isolating most versions are, and usually everyone just does their own thing. If you're feeling a bit more social, you might want to try number 4 on the list, which is World Diplomacy or Europe Diplomacy 1600s. I'm going to put these maps together because I think they ultimately do the same thing as historical diplomacy maps. Something about the fact that it's the real world I think just makes everyone a bit more emotionally invested. What's great about these games is they tend to balance themselves really well, and if someone's particularly strong, they tend to try to expand early, which makes everyone team up against them out of self-preservation. There's a lot of choice of how you play these, and sometimes if everyone's friendly and really gets into it, it turns into a peaceful game of trading, United Nations, and negotiating trade deals and sending diplomats. And other games, sometimes even within the same game, it's a complete free-for-all on the water and land. Other times it turns into a Cold War where people build bombard towers in each other's bases, but no one declares war because of the threat of mutual annihilation. You never know going into it what everyone's motives and personalities are, which gives it a lot of replayability and depth. It's also completely relaxed in terms of what the win condition is, and at any point players could all go Allied victory and end the game with world peace. Obviously, some people don't like those ambiguous alliances and want a good old-fashioned good versus evil story, and those people will probably prefer number 3, which is the Lord of the Rings scenarios. Again, I'm going to put a few different maps together under this umbrella since there's more than one really good version, and there's a Helms Deep version that I think will appeal to the same sort of player. The reason I put these so much higher on the list than the arguably similar Westeros Game of Thrones ones is, unlike Game of Thrones, I think the source material for Lord of the Rings lends itself to a blend of random map style gameplay with economies and armies, but also the inclusion of quests and events, like bringing the ring to Mordor or being right at the edge of defeat in Helm's Deep just as the Rohirrim arrives. That blending of the random map and trigger events means that you can play it like a regular random map if you want and have a great game, but at the same time you could also try to play it almost like an RPG, spending a lot of your time and attention on your hero characters and their quests. If the team play aspect isn't for you but you like the idea of Middle-earth, there's also a Nomad variation that you can play diplomacy style, though obviously that removes the extra quests like the Ring and the Army of the Dead, etc. Speaking of Armies of the Dead, number 2 on the list is Zombies Awakening and the similar hunter-builder variation Jurassic Park. Now, Zombies Awakening has gone through a couple of phases of popularity, and Jurassic Park, which also goes by the name Jurassic Map, has had at least one popular phase as well, and they share a lot of similarities. The premise of all the variations in the genre is that 1 or 2 players, usually selected randomly, play as the hunter and track down and kill the other players, who in turn hide and wall themselves in, trying to survive a certain amount of time. I find Zombies Awakening is particularly fun for the prey because you can build a fairly large town and fortify yourself by mining gold and buying upgrades for your towers and walls. The Predator, on the other hand, spends the first little while trying to find all the prey and collect relics, and then later in the game uses incredibly powerful units with plus 1000 attack or more to smash their way through the defenses. Depending on how strong the Predator is early, the maps can vary slightly on their emphasis between the walling and tower defense element versus the hide and go seek element, which is pretty unique as far as Age of Empires scenarios go, and it makes it stand out enough to rank very high on this list. Before we get to number 1, I want to give some honorable mentions. A couple of other scenarios that didn't make the list for various reasons but are worth checking out are Sheep Soccer, where you use units to control a sheep and try to score on the opposite team's net. There's another one called Paintball, which involves running around a forest trying to snipe enemy hand cannoneers. And I want to make a mention to Mare Nostrum, which is another popular diplomacy map based on an epic beloved custom campaign called Gwendelgard. I'm just focusing on multiplayer scenarios for this list though, and keeping that in mind, the number 1 type of scenario on HD has to be CBA, of course, which strictly speaking refers to Castle Blood Automatic. I'm gonna just include all of the other blood maps here with it, though I could probably make an entire separate top 10 or even top 100 list just looking at scenarios that fall under that umbrella. In general, they're played as 4 vs 4, and you start with castles, generating units until you get to a certain population. Your goal is to take your army and get kills and raises, and those good things are rewarded in different ways depending on the version, but include stuff like advancing to the next age, giving you technologies, and in some versions spawning better units, and often there's also a way to get villagers, which can wall and build other military buildings to supplement your army. The end goal is to destroy your opponent's castles or towers while defending your own, and it involves a lot of patrolling units and coordinating attacks with your allies. There's a very competitive community, and I don't consider myself in any way an expert of the intricacies of how to play it well, so I can't speak much to those, but there's no question it's number 1 on this list. So let me know if your favorite scenario showed up. If there's enough interest in any one of them, I'm open to the idea in doing a video going into that particular scenario in a little bit more depth, as I said before. One thing I do want to mention is if you're planning to try one of these at the moment, at least in HD, they don't always transfer properly, and if it doesn't transfer to someone, it won't be able to start. So the best way I found to fix that is to switch in the lobby to a different scenario and then switch back. Most of the time, that'll get it to go. That's all for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.